The fluorescent lights of St. Catherine's Hospital hum their eternal midnight song as I navigate the sterile corridors with the kind of exhausted autopilot that comes from pulling double shifts 3 times this week. My sneakers squeaking against linoleum floors that smell perpetually of disinfectant and broken dreams. I've been a trauma nurse for 5 years now, long enough to know that the graveyard shift brings out either the worst of humanity or the most vulnerable, and tonight has already delivered both in spades. A car accident victim who didn't make it despite our best efforts, a domestic violence case that made my blood boil, and sweet old Mr. Henderson in 304B who keeps forgetting he just had hip surgery and tries to waltz to the bathroom every 30 minutes like his bones are still young and unbreakable. My feet ache. My scrubs have coffee stains from the awful break room brew that tastes like liquid regret. And I have exactly 4 hours left on my shift before I can collapse into my bed and pretend the world doesn't exist for a blessed few hours. But first I need to check on Mr. Henderson one more time, because his call button has been suspiciously silent for the last hour, which either means he's finally sleeping, or he's attempted another unauthorized bathroom expedition, and is currently sprawled on the floor waiting for help. I push open the door to what I absolutely, completely, without a shadow of doubt believe is room 304B, already rehearsing my gentle scolding about staying in bed and using the call button. But the words die in my throat like flowers touched by sudden frost, because the man in this bed is definitely not 78-year-old Mr. Henderson, with his wispy white hair and grandfather smile. This man is younger, maybe mid-30s, with dark hair that falls across a face carved from marble and sin. And even unconscious, there's something terrifying and magnetic about him, like a sleeping panther that could wake and strike at any moment. But what really stops my heart and sends ice flooding through my veins is the massive bloom of crimson spreading across the white sheets at his abdomen. The unmistakable dark stain of blood that's fresh and flowing, and entirely wrong for this geriatric recovery ward. My nursing instincts war with my survival instincts as I stand frozen in the doorway, my brain screaming that this is wrong, all wrong, that gunshot wounds don't belong on the 4th floor recovery wing, that this man with his expensive watch and the dangerous energy that radiates from him, even in unconsciousness, doesn't belong in Mr. Henderson's room, and that I should turn around right now and get security, get my supervisor, get anyone but myself involved in whatever fresh hell this situation represents. But I can't move, can't breathe, can't do anything except stare at the way his chest rises and falls with shallow breaths that suggest he's circling the drain faster than anyone realizes, and my hands are already reaching for the emergency call button mounted on the wall before my conscious mind catches up to what my body already knows, that regardless of who this man is, or how he got here, or what kind of trouble he represents, he's a patient, and he's dying. And I took an oath that didn't come with fine print about only saving the good guys. I pressed the button once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession, my heart hammering against my ribs like it's trying to break free and run away without me, and I'm moving toward the bed on legs that feel disconnected from my body, my professional assessment already cataloging the damage even as my hindbrain screams warnings about getting involved in something that smells like organized crime and danger. The wound is a through-and-through gunshot to the lower left quadrant of his abdomen, possibly nicking the intestines but mercifully missing what looks like major arteries, though he's lost enough blood to paint the sheets in abstract patterns that would be almost beautiful if they weren't so terrifying. And I'm reaching for the gauze in my pocket, applying pressure even though I know I should wait for backup, should maintain professional distance, should do 1,000 things that aren't putting my hands on a man who radiates danger like other people radiate body heat. That's when his eyes open, and I learn what it means to be truly afraid. Because these aren't the confused, pain-glazed eyes of a typical trauma patient. These are eyes like winter storms over steel oceans, gray and cold and infinitely calculating, focusing on me with an intensity that makes me feel like a butterfly pinned to a board, examined and catalogued and found wanting, or perhaps found interesting, which might be worse. His hand moves faster than should be possible for someone who's lost this much blood, wrapping around my wrist with a grip that's iron wrapped in expensive Italian leather. And I can feel my pulse jackrabbiting against his fingers as he holds me there, studying me with a gaze that seems to see straight through my scrubs and skin to count every terrified beat of my heart. "You're not supposed to be here," he says, and his voice is like smoke and whiskey and midnight promises, rough with pain, but underlaid with an authority that makes it clear he's used to being obeyed without question. And I realize with a clarity that feels like diving into ice water that this man is someone important, someone powerful, someone who definitely should not be bleeding out in room 304B of a public hospital on the geriatric recovery floor. "Neither are you," I manage to say, proud that my voice only shakes a little, that I sound almost professional despite the fact that his grip on my wrist is simultaneously threatening and somehow grounding, keeping me anchored when every instinct screams to run. "This is supposed to be Mr. Henderson's room, and you're supposed to be in a trauma bay being treated by people who know what they're doing with gunshot wounds, not bleeding out in a recovery ward, where the most exciting medical emergency we usually handle is someone's blood pressure medication being delivered late." I know I'm babbling, know that shock and fear are making me run my mouth when I should be staying quiet and calm and professional. But there's something about those steel-gray eyes that makes me want to fill the silence, to prove I'm not completely terrified, even though we both know it's a lie. His lips twitch in what might be amusement or might be a pain spasm, and he doesn't let go of my wrist, doesn't release me from his grip or his gaze, and I'm suddenly very aware that we're alone in this room, that no one has responded to my emergency call button yet, that this man could snap my bones like dry twigs if he wanted to, and there would be nothing I could do to stop him. "My men made a mistake," he says, each word carefully measured as if speaking requires more effort than he wants to admit, and I can see the pain etched in the lines around his mouth, the way his jaw clenches against what must be agony. "They were supposed to take me to the private wing, but there was some confusion in the chaos, and I ended up here instead, in the wrong room with the wrong nurse who has very unfortunately seen my face and now knows I exist." The implication hangs in the air between us like a blade, and I understand with perfect, terrible clarity that I've stumbled into something that people probably get killed for witnessing, that this man's presence in a public hospital represents some kind of vulnerability, that men like him, and I know exactly what kind of man he is now, can read it in the expensive watch and the dangerous eyes and the way he talks about his men, like he commands an army, cannot afford to have witnessed by random night shift nurses who happen to walk into the wrong room. My nursing training wars with my survival instinct, the part of me that took an oath to do no harm battling with the part that wants to live to see tomorrow, and I'm shocked to discover that the oath is winning, that despite my fear I'm still mentally cataloging his injuries and calculating what I need to do to keep him alive. "You're going to die if someone doesn't treat that wound properly," I hear myself saying, and I'm pulling against his grip now, not to escape but to get closer, to get better access to the injury that's stealing his life one crimson drop at a time. "I don't care if you're the president or a crime lord or the devil himself. You're bleeding out and you need immediate medical intervention. So you can either let me help you, or you can lie there and bleed to death while contemplating whatever mistake brought you to the wrong floor of a public hospital. But either way, you need to make a decision fast because you've got maybe 20 minutes before you go into hypovolemic shock, and then your choices become very limited very quickly." I surprise myself with the steel in my voice, the way I'm talking to this dangerous stranger like he's any other patient refusing treatment, and something shifts in his expression. Some calculation being made behind those winter storm eyes that I can't begin to interpret. He releases my wrist slowly, deliberately, his fingers trailing across my pulse point in a way that feels almost possessive. And then his hand falls back to the bed, as if the effort of holding me has exhausted his remaining reserves of strength. "Then help me, nurse," he says, and there's something in his voice that sounds almost like respect, or perhaps curiosity about this woman who's more afraid of him dying than of what he might do to her if he lives. "But understand that once you make this choice, once you become complicit in keeping me alive, there's no going back to your simple life of checking on old men and drinking terrible hospital coffee, because I don't leave loose ends, and you, with your brave green eyes and your healer's hands, have just become something much more interesting than a loose end. The threat and the promise are wrapped together so tightly I can't separate them. Can't tell if he's warning me away or pulling me closer. But it doesn't matter because my hands are already moving. Already stripping away the blood-soaked sheets to get better access to the wound. Already falling into the familiar rhythm of assessment and treatment, even as my mind screams that I'm making a catastrophic mistake. I work quickly and efficiently, using the supplies from the crash cart I managed to wheel in during those first frantic moments, my hands steady, despite the fear that's singing through my veins like electricity. And he watches me the entire time with those unsettling eyes that seem to catalog every movement, every breath, every micro-expression that crosses my face. He doesn't make a sound when I clean the wound, doesn't flinch when I probe to assess the damage, and I realize he's had practice enduring pain, that this isn't the first time he's been shot and probably won't be the last, and that thought should terrify me more than it does. But instead I find myself wondering what kind of life requires that kind of practiced stoicism in the face of agony. "You're good at this," he observes, when I've finally stopped the active bleeding and started the process of proper wound care, and there's genuine appreciation in his voice beneath the pain and exhaustion. "Steady hands? Clear thinking under pressure? No hesitation once you committed to the course of action? These are valuable qualities in my world, nurse. Much more valuable than they probably are in yours, where the most dangerous thing you usually face is a patient throwing their Jell-O cup at you." "My name is Catalina," I say, because somehow being called nurse by this man feels wrong. Feels like letting him reduce me to a function instead of a person. And if I'm going to be murdered for helping him, or dragged into whatever darkness surrounds him, he should at least know the name of the woman whose life he's destroying. Catalina Moretti, and in my world people generally survive the night without bullet holes in their abdomen, so maybe your world isn't as superior as you think it is. The words are out before I can stop them, reckless and brave and stupid all at once. But instead of being angry, he laughs, a rough sound that turns into a pained cough that makes me reach for him instinctively, my hand on his shoulder steadying him until the spasm passes. "Catalina Moretti," he repeats, tasting my name like wine, and there's something predatory in his smile that makes my stomach flutter with an emotion that definitely isn't fear, or at least isn't only fear. "I'm Dante Valorian, and you've just saved the life of the most dangerous man on the East Coast, which means your world and mine are about to become very intimately acquainted whether you like it or not." The door bursts open before I can process that statement, before I can fully comprehend the magnitude of what I've just done, and 3 men in expensive suits flood into the room with weapons drawn and murder in their eyes. And I realize that saving Dante Valorian's life might have been the easy part, because now I have to survive the aftermath of becoming entangled with a man who openly admits to being dangerous, who looks at me like I'm a puzzle he's determined to solve, and who has just declared that my simple life is over, with the kind of finality that suggests arguing would be both pointless and potentially fatal. The 3 men who burst through the door move with the kind of coordinated precision that speaks of military training and years of working together in situations where hesitation means death. Their weapons sweeping the room in controlled arcs before zeroing in on me with an intensity that makes my blood turn to ice water in my veins. And I realize with a clarity that feels like being doused in freezing rain that these are Dante Valorian's men, his soldiers or guards or whatever term the criminal underworld uses for people who carry guns and look at a random nurse like she's a threat that needs immediate neutralization. The tallest one, a mountain of a man with a scar running down his left cheek and eyes like chips of obsidian, takes a step toward me with his weapon raised, and I'm suddenly very aware that I'm still holding bloody gauze in my hands, that I'm covered in Dante's blood, that from their perspective I could be anyone, a rival gang member, an assassin who finished the job someone else started, a threat that needs to be eliminated before questions are asked or answers are given. My throat closes around a scream that won't come, my body frozen in that terrible moment between recognizing danger and being able to respond to it. But before the man with the scar can take another step toward me, before I can find my voice to explain or plead or do anything except stand there and wait to die, Dante's voice cuts through the tension like a blade through silk. "Stand down, Renzo," he commands, and despite the pain that must be tearing through him, despite the blood loss that should have him barely conscious, his voice carries the kind of absolute authority that makes grown men with guns immediately lower their weapons and snap to attention like soldiers before a general. The nurse saved my life, not attempted to take it, and if any of you so much as breathe in her direction with hostile intent, I'll personally ensure you spend the next month wishing you'd never been born. The threat is delivered in the same smoke and whiskey voice he used with me earlier, casual and conversational, and somehow more terrifying for its lack of heat. And I watch as Renzo and the other two men immediately holster their weapons and shift their attention from me to their boss, their body language transforming from predatory to protective in the space of a heartbeat. Renzo moves to Dante's bedside with surprising gentleness for such a large man, his scarred face creasing with concern as he takes in the makeshift bandaging I've applied and the pallor of Dante's skin that suggests he's still dancing on the edge of critical. And when he speaks, his voice carries the rough affection of someone who's known Dante for years and has probably saved his life as many times as Dante has saved his. "Boss, we need to get you out of here and to the private facility where Dr. Castellano can properly treat you, because this public hospital is crawling with security cameras and nosy administrators and all kinds of complications we don't need, especially not with the Kozlov family probably already mobilizing to finish what they started," Renzo says, already moving to coordinate the extraction with the efficiency of someone who's done this before, who's moved injured men out of compromising situations more times than I can imagine. But Dante's eyes never leave my face, those winter storm irises studying me with an intensity that makes me feel like he's reading every thought I've ever had, cataloging every fear and hope and secret dream I've kept locked away in the private corners of my heart. And when he finally speaks again, I know with bone-deep certainty that my life is about to change in ways I cannot begin to predict or prevent. "We're taking the nurse with us," he says, and the words land in the sterile hospital room like grenades, explosive and devastating and absolutely final, in a way that makes my knees go weak and my breath catch in my throat. "I'm sorry, what?" I managed to say, my voice coming out higher and thinner than I'd like, stripped of the professional competence I managed to maintain while treating his wound and revealing the terrified woman beneath the scrubs and the nursing degree. "You can't just take me. I have a job and a life and patients who need me, and I didn't sign up for whatever insanity you're suggesting when I helped you. I just did what any decent human being with medical training would do when confronted with a dying man." I'm backing toward the door as I speak, my hand still clutching the bloody gauze like it's some kind of talisman that might protect me from the reality that's closing in around me like a trap. But Renzo moves with surprising speed for his size, positioning himself between me and my escape route without any appearance of effort or urgency. Just a casual repositioning that happens to completely block my only exit. Dante struggles to sit up, despite the obvious pain it causes him, waving off Renzo's attempt to help him stay horizontal. And his gaze pins me in place more effectively than any physical restraint as he explains the new reality I've stumbled into with all the gentleness of an executioner's blade. "Catalina Moretti, you became part of this the moment you chose to help me instead of running or calling security. And while I appreciate the altruistic motivation behind that choice, the practical reality is that you're now a witness who can identify me, who knows I was vulnerable, who has information that my enemies would pay dearly to extract from you through methods that would make your worst nightmares seem pleasant by comparison," he says, each word measured and deliberate. And I can see he's telling me the truth as he understands it, that this isn't cruelty but rather some twisted form of protection wrapped in imprisonment. The Kozlov family has eyes everywhere, including in this hospital, and the moment they discover that a nurse on the 4th floor treated a gunshot wound tonight, they'll know it was me, and they'll come for you to find out everything you know. Where I am, how badly I'm injured, what weaknesses they can exploit, and they won't ask nicely or take no for an answer. The fear that's been simmering in my gut since those steel-gray eyes first opened transforms into full-blown terror as I process what he's saying. As I understand that helping him hasn't just complicated my life but potentially ended it. That my simple existence of night shifts and coffee breaks and going home to my small apartment to feed my cat has just been obliterated by a single wrong turn into the wrong hospital room. So what are you saying, exactly? I ask, even though I already know the answer. Can read it in the implacable set of his jaw and the way Renzo and the other men are already preparing to move, gathering supplies and checking exits, and doing all the things people do when they're about to disappear, someone from a public place without leaving traces. That I'm your prisoner now, that you're kidnapping me because I had the misfortune of trying to save your life. That my reward for doing the right thing is to be dragged into your world of bullets and blood and whatever fresh hell you people navigate on a daily basis. The anger feels good, feels better than the fear, gives me something to hold on to as the reality of my situation crystallizes into sharp, cutting clarity. Dante has the audacity to look almost apologetic. Though the expression sits strangely on features that seem designed for dominance and control rather than regret. And when he speaks again, there's something in his voice that might be respect, or might be the closest thing a man like him can come to genuine remorse. I'm saying that you have two choices, neither of which is ideal, but one of which keeps you alive, and the other almost certainly doesn't. He explains with the patience of someone laying out a business proposition rather than destroying someone's entire existence. You can stay here, go back to your normal life, pretend this never happened, and hope that the Kozlov family doesn't find you before my people can neutralize the threat, which given their resources and ruthlessness I'd estimate gives you maybe 48 hours before you disappear into one of their black sites never to be seen again. Or you can come with us willingly, accept my protection and my hospitality until this situation is resolved, and trust that I keep my word when I say that no harm will come to you while you're under my care. The choice he's offering isn't really a choice at all, and we both know it. But I appreciate that he's at least pretending to give me agency in a situation where I have absolutely none, that he's offering the illusion of consent even as his men position themselves to physically carry me out if necessary. I think about my apartment with its second-hand furniture and the cat I rescued from the shelter last year, about my co-workers who will wonder where I disappeared to when I don't show up for my next shift, about the life I've carefully built over 5 years of grinding night shifts and saving money and trying to make a difference in a world that often seems determined to crush anyone who cares too much. I think about my mother in Pittsburgh who calls every Sunday and would be devastated to lose another child after my brother died in a car accident 3 years ago, about the small circle of friends I've managed to maintain despite my brutal work schedule, about all the normal, mundane, precious things that make up a life and how I'm being asked to walk away from all of it, because I made the mistake of being compassionate in a world where compassion is apparently a liability. But I also think about what Dante said, about men who would torture me for information I don't even fully possess, about becoming collateral damage in a war I don't understand between forces I can't fight. And I realize that my choice isn't between my old life and a new one, but rather between certain death and uncertain captivity. And when framed that way, the decision makes itself even as everything in me rebels against the necessity of making it. If I come with you, how long are we talking about? I ask, hating how small my voice sounds, how defeated, but needing to understand the parameters of my new prison even as I'm accepting its inevitability. Days, weeks, months until you decide I'm no longer useful, or no longer a threat. Or is this one of those situations where I disappear forever, and my mother spends the rest of her life wondering what happened to her only remaining child? Renzo makes a sound that might be discomfort at my bluntness, but Dante's expression doesn't change, doesn't soften or harden. He just continues to study me with those penetrating eyes that seem to catalog every micro-expression and file it away for future reference. I don't know, he admits, and I'm surprised by the honesty, by the fact that he's not trying to sell me comfortable lies or false promises. The situation with the Kozlov family is volatile, and these things tend to resolve themselves either very quickly or drag on for months, depending on variables I can't control. But what I can tell you is that you'll be treated well, given everything you need, and released unharmed when it's safe for you to return to your life. assuming you still want to return to checking vitals and dealing with difficult patients after you've seen how the other half lives. There's something almost like dark humor in that last statement, a suggestion that my life of hospital shifts and modest apartment might seem unbearably mundane after whatever he's planning to expose me to. And I want to argue that nothing could make me prefer his world of violence and danger to my safe, boring existence. But the words stick in my throat because some small, reckless part of me is already curious about what exists beyond the boundaries of my carefully constructed life. Fine, I say, the word tasting like surrender and survival all mixed together. I'll come with you, but I need to make a phone call to my supervisor to say I have a family emergency and won't be in for my remaining shifts. And I need to arrange for someone to feed my cat. And I need you to promise me that this is protection and not some elaborate prelude to making me disappear permanently. Dante nods slowly, and I see something that might be approval flicker across his features. Appreciation for the fact that I'm trying to maintain some control even as my world crumbles around me. Renzo will supervise your phone calls to ensure you don't say anything that might complicate the situation, and will send someone to care for your cat and make sure your apartment is maintained until you can return to it, Dante says, already thinking through logistics, with the kind of efficiency that suggests he's navigated situations like this before, that I'm not the first civilian who's gotten caught in his dangerous orbit. As for my promise, I give you my word as the head of the Valorian family that you will not be harmed while under my protection, that you are a guest rather than a prisoner regardless of how the circumstances might appear, and that when this is over, you'll be free to return to your life with compensation for the inconvenience and disruption we've caused. He extends his hand toward me, palm up in a gesture that's somehow both offering and demand, and I stare at it for a long moment before placing my smaller hand in his, feeling the calluses and scars that mark his palm, and the surprising warmth of his grip as he squeezes gently, sealing whatever bargain we've just made with a handshake that feels far more binding than any contract. Renzo and the other men move into action with practiced efficiency, producing civilian clothes to replace Dante's blood-soaked hospital gown, arranging for a wheelchair that will allow them to move him without attracting attention, and generally orchestrating an extraction that probably happens more smoothly than it has any right to, given that we're in a functioning hospital with security cameras and staff who might notice a dangerous crime lord being wheeled out, accompanied by armed men and a traumatized nurse. I make my phone calls under Renzo's watchful eye, telling my supervisor that my mother has had a health crisis and I need to take emergency family leave, arranging for my neighbor to feed my cat and water my plants, saying all the normal things that people say when life intervenes in their carefully planned schedules. But the whole time I'm talking, I'm watching Dante being prepared for transport, watching the way his men handle him with a combination of military precision and genuine care that suggests he's more than just their boss, that there's loyalty and perhaps even affection beneath the criminal hierarchy. Within 20 minutes of making the decision to go with them, I find myself being escorted through maintenance corridors and service elevators that I didn't even know existed in the hospital, where I've worked for 5 years, moving through the bowels of the building like ghosts or shadows, and then we're emerging into an underground parking garage, where a black SUV with tinted windows waits like some kind of predatory beast ready to swallow me whole and carry me away from everything I've ever known. As Renzo helps me into the vehicle, and I settle into leather seats that probably cost more than my monthly rent, as I watch Dante being carefully positioned beside me with the kind of attention usually reserved for priceless artifacts, as the engine purrs to life and we begin moving toward whatever fate awaits me in the world of the Valorian crime family. I catch sight of my reflection in the tinted window and barely recognize the wide-eyed woman staring back at me, this stranger who looks like Catalina Moretti, but whose life has just been irrevocably altered by a wrong turn into a hospital room. Dante's hand finds mine in the darkness of the vehicle, his fingers threading through mine with a possessiveness that should frighten me but instead feels almost grounding. And when he speaks, his voice is rough with pain and exhaustion, but underlaid with something that sounds almost like promise. "Welcome to my world, Catalina Moretti," he says, as the hospital disappears behind us, and we plunge into the night-dark streets of a city that suddenly feels foreign and full of hidden dangers I never imagined existed beneath its familiar surface. I have a feeling you're going to be far more interesting than either of us anticipated, and I'm very much looking forward to discovering exactly what kind of woman chooses to save a monster's life, even when she knows it might destroy her own. The Valorian estate materializes out of the darkness like something from a fever dream. All wrought iron gates and manicured hedges and security checkpoints that remind me with brutal clarity that I'm entering a fortress designed to keep the world out, and its occupants safely imprisoned within. And as we wind up the long driveway past fountains and sculptures that probably cost more than I'll earn in my entire lifetime, I feel the last threads of my normal life fraying and snapping like overworn sutures under too much pressure. The mansion itself is a monument to wealth and power that borders on obscene 3 stories of honey-colored stone and floor-to-ceiling windows that somehow manage to be both welcoming and intimidating simultaneously. The kind of place that belongs in architectural magazines or movies about people whose problems I could never comprehend, not in the reality of a trauma nurse from Pittsburgh who drives a 15-year-old Honda and considers splurging on takeout instead of cooking to be a major financial decision. Renzo helps Dante from the vehicle with the practiced ease of someone who's done this too many times before, and I follow on legs that feel disconnected from my body, my nursing instincts warring with my sense of self-preservation as I watch Dante lean heavily on his second-in-command, the pallor of his skin and the tightness around his mouth suggesting that the adrenaline that kept him alert and commanding during our escape has finally worn off and left him with nothing but pain and exhaustion. A woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair, pulled into an immaculate bun, and the bearing of someone accustomed to running a household with military precision, appears at the entrance, her sharp eyes taking in the scene with a single sweeping glance that seems to miss nothing. And when she speaks, her voice carries the faint trace of an Italian accent, wrapped around words that are pure efficiency and controlled concern. Master Dante, Dr. Castellano is waiting in the medical suite, and I've prepared the blue guest room for your companion as you requested, though I must say that bringing home strays is becoming something of a habit for you, she says, the mild rebuke in her tone suggesting a familiarity and fondness that transcends the typical employer-employee relationship. And I realize this must be the housekeeper, or major domo, or whatever wealthy criminals call the people who manage their domestic empires. Dante manages a pained smile that transforms his features from dangerous to almost boyish, and I catch a glimpse of what he might have been before life and violence carved away whatever softness he once possessed. Maria, this is Catalina Moretti, the nurse who saved my life tonight, and who will be staying with us as our honored guest until certain complications are resolved, he says, pointedly emphasizing the word guest in a way that makes me wonder if he's trying to convince Maria or himself, or me, that I'm here voluntarily, rather than as a beautifully dressed prisoner in a gilded cage. Please ensure she has everything she needs and make her feel welcome, because I suspect we're going to be seeing quite a lot of each other in the coming weeks. Maria's sharp eyes shift to me, assessing and calculating in a way that makes me feel like I'm being evaluated for worth and potential threat simultaneously. But after a moment, something in her expression softens fractionally, and she nods with the kind of acceptance that suggests she's seen stranger things in her tenure managing Dante's household. Of course, Master Dante. I'll see to it personally that Miss Moretti is comfortable and has everything she requires, she says, already moving to take charge of the situation with the efficiency of a battlefield general deploying troops. But first you need to let Dr. Castellano examine you properly before you collapse from blood loss and stubbornness, because I have no intention of explaining to your mother why I let you bleed to death in the foyer when there's a perfectly good medical facility 10 meters away. The mention of Dante's mother startles me, a reminder that even crime lords have families and histories and people who worry about them, humanizing him in a way that makes the whole situation even more surreal and complicated. Renzo and another guard whose name I haven't learned help Dante toward what Maria called the medical suite, and I find myself following, because despite everything, the kidnapping and the fear and the total destruction of my normal life, I'm still a nurse, and some part of me needs to ensure he receives proper treatment, needs to see this patient through to the other side of crisis, even if that patient is also my captor. The medical suite turns out to be better equipped than some small-town emergency rooms I've worked in, a pristine space filled with state-of-the-art equipment and supplies that must have cost a fortune to acquire and maintain. And standing in the center of this impressive setup is a distinguished man in his late 50s, with silver hair and the calm, competent demeanor of someone who's spent decades treating injuries that can't be explained to authorities or documented in official records. "Dante, you've really outdone yourself this time," Dr. Castellano says, with the weary affection of someone who's patched up his patient more times than either of them would care to count. A through-and-through gunshot to the abdomen, significant blood loss, and from what Renzo tells me, you've been conscious and giving orders for the past hour, instead of resting like any sensible person would do, after being shot. His eyes land on me with curiosity and professional assessment, taking in my blood-stained scrubs and the way I'm hovering near Dante like a satellite caught in gravitational pull, unable to fully commit to staying or leaving. "And you must be the nurse who provided field treatment. I understand we have you to thank for the fact that he's still alive and arguing instead of bleeding out in some public hospital where his presence would have created all manner of complications." I nod mutely, suddenly exhausted by the events of the past few hours, by the adrenaline crash that's making my hands shake and my knees feel weak, by the surreal experience of standing in a crime lord's private medical facility discussing his treatment like this is somehow a normal professional consultation. I did what I could with what was available, but he needs proper imaging and monitoring, and probably antibiotics to prevent infection. And honestly, he should be in a real hospital with a full surgical team on standby in case there are complications I couldn't detect with a basic field assessment, I hear myself saying, falling back into the familiar rhythm of medical consultation, because it's the only thing that feels real and solid in a situation that's become increasingly dreamlike and unstable. Dr. Castellano smiles with what looks like approval, gesturing for me to come closer, to participate in the examination rather than observe from the sidelines, and I find myself drawn into the familiar dance of medical assessment, discussing treatment options and potential complications with a physician who clearly knows his business despite working outside the conventional healthcare system. Dante watches this interaction with those penetrating gray eyes, and I can see him cataloging this new information about me, filing away the fact that I'm more concerned with his medical outcome than my own predicament, that even terrified and displaced I still default to being a healer rather than a victim. An hour later, after Dr. Castellano has cleaned and properly sutured Dante's wound, administered antibiotics and pain medication, and confirmed that my field treatment probably saved his life by preventing him from bleeding out before reaching proper medical care, Maria appears to guide me to my room with the kind of gentle firmness that suggests she's accustomed to managing shell-shocked guests who need direction because they're too overwhelmed to make decisions for themselves. We climb a sweeping staircase that belongs in a museum, walk down hallways lined with artwork that's probably worth more than my entire net worth, and finally arrive at a door that Maria opens to reveal a bedroom that's larger than my entire apartment, decorated in shades of blue and cream with furniture that looks like it was handcrafted by masters, and a bed that could comfortably sleep 4 people. The bathroom is through that door, and you'll find everything you need, including clothing, in your approximate size, though if anything doesn't fit properly, just let me know and I'll have it adjusted," Maria says, her tone warming slightly as she takes in what must be my completely overwhelmed expression. "Master Dante has instructed that you're to have access to the entire house and grounds with the exception of his private office and the security wing, and you're welcome to request anything you need at any time. Though I should mention that the estate is monitored and attempting to leave without permission would be both futile and potentially dangerous given the current situation with the Kozlov family." The reminder that I'm a prisoner despite the luxury surrounding me lands like a physical blow, and I sink onto the edge of the magnificent bed, feeling the full weight of my situation crushing down on my shoulders like a building collapsing in slow motion. "How often does this happen?" I ask, not really expecting an answer but needing to voice the question that's been burning in my mind since we left the hospital. How often does Dante Valorian kidnap innocent people and install them in guest rooms and pretend they're here voluntarily when everyone knows they're really just well-treated hostages? Maria is quiet for a long moment, and when she finally speaks, there's something almost gentle in her voice. A maternal quality that makes my chest ache with longing for my own mother who must be sleeping peacefully in Pittsburgh, completely unaware that her daughter's life has just been turned inside out. In the 15 years I've worked for the Valorian family, Master Dante has never brought anyone to this house who wasn't either family, trusted business associates, or staff, and he's certainly never gone to such lengths to ensure someone's comfort and safety while they're under his protection, she says carefully, choosing her words with the precision of someone navigating a minefield. Whatever you think this situation is, Miss Moretti, I'd encourage you to keep an open mind, because Master Dante is many things: dangerous, ruthless, unforgiving to his enemies. But he's also a man of his word. And if he's promised you safety and eventual freedom, then you can trust that promise more than you can trust anything else in this uncertain world. After Maria leaves me alone in my gilded prison, I shower in a bathroom that's roughly the size of my entire bedroom back home, washing away the blood and the hospital smell and the physical evidence of the night that destroyed my normal life. And when I finally emerge wrapped in a towel that probably costs more than my weekly grocery budget, I find that someone has laid out clothing on the bed, expensive loungewear and soft fabrics that fit perfectly despite Maria never having taken my measurements, which suggests a level of preparation and attention to detail that's both impressive and deeply unsettling. I dress mechanically, my mind still trying to process the series of events that led me from checking on Mr. Henderson to standing in a crime lord's mansion wearing clothes that cost more than I make in a week. And when I catch sight of myself in the full-length mirror, I barely recognize the woman staring back at me. This stranger who looks like Catalina Moretti, but exists in a world so far removed from everything I've known that she might as well be a different person entirely. Sleep should be impossible given the circumstances, given the fear and uncertainty and complete destruction of everything familiar and safe. But exhaustion pulls me under almost the moment my head hits pillows that feel like clouds, and I surrender to unconsciousness with the desperate hope that maybe I'll wake up and discover this was all some bizarre, stress-induced nightmare brought on by too many double shifts and not enough sleep. But morning comes with golden sunlight streaming through windows that overlook grounds more beautiful than any park I've ever visited, and the reality of my situation crashes over me like a wave as I remember where I am and why I'm here and how my simple act of compassion has somehow landed me in the orbit of a man who radiates danger and charisma in equal measure. A soft knock on the door precedes Maria's entrance, and she's carrying a tray laden with coffee that smells like heaven and pastries that look too beautiful to eat, and fresh fruit arranged with the kind of artistic precision that seems wasteful for a simple breakfast. Master Dante has requested your presence in his room when you're ready, as he'd like to discuss the situation and ensure you understand the parameters of your stay here, Maria says, setting the tray on a small table near the window. He's resting comfortably according to Dr. Castellano, though of course he's already trying to work and conduct business despite being told he needs at least 48 hours of bed rest, because the man has never met a medical instruction he didn't feel compelled to ignore. There's fondness mixed with exasperation in her tone, and I find myself almost smiling despite everything, recognizing the universal frustration of medical professionals everywhere who deal with patients who make terrible decisions about their own health. I force myself to eat, even though my stomach is twisted with anxiety, knowing that I'll need energy for whatever comes next. And then Maria guides me through the mansion's labyrinthine corridors to a wing I didn't see last night, stopping outside a door of dark, polished wood that probably costs more than my car. She knocks twice and then opens it without waiting for a response, gesturing for me to enter a space that's clearly Dante's private sanctuary. A massive bedroom done in dark woods and deep colors that somehow manage to be both masculine and refined, and there in a bed that looks like it was designed for royalty is the man himself, propped up against pillows with a laptop balanced on his legs, and looking far too alert and commanding for someone who was bleeding out less than 12 hours ago. "Catalina," he says, and the way he says my name makes it sound like a caress and a claim all wrapped together. Those winter storm eyes tracking my movement across the room with an intensity that makes my skin prickle with awareness. "I trust you slept well, though I imagine the circumstances made rest somewhat difficult, and I wanted to speak with you privately about what happens next, about the rules and expectations and realities of your time here in my home." I settle into a chair, positioned at what feels like a safe distance from his bed, though the knowing look in his eyes suggests he's aware of my attempt to maintain physical and emotional distance, and finds it either amusing or pointless or both. "I've been thinking about our conversation from last night, about the choice you gave me that wasn't really a choice, and I have questions that I need answered if I'm expected to just accept this situation without losing my mind," I say, surprised by the steadiness in my voice, by the fact that a night's sleep in luxury has somehow restored some of my courage, or perhaps just my anger at having my life disrupted so completely. Dante closes his laptop and gives me his full attention, and I'm struck again by how he can make even lying in a bed, recovering from a gunshot wound, seem powerful and commanding, like the injury is merely an inconvenience rather than a serious threat to his life. "Ask your questions, and I'll answer them with as much honesty as the situation allows, because I find that transparency tends to create better outcomes than deception, at least in circumstances where the parties involved are forced to trust each other whether they want to or not," he says, and I take a deep breath before diving into the turbulent waters of my new reality. "Who are the Kozlov family, and why do they want you dead badly enough that they'd torture an innocent nurse for information? What exactly do you do that requires this level of security and violence? How long do you realistically expect me to stay here before it's safe for me to return to my normal life? And what happens if I decide I can't handle this arrangement and want to leave regardless of the risks?" The questions tumble out in a rush, months of pent-up confusion and fear and anger finding voice, and Dante listens without interrupting, his expression thoughtful and almost respectful as he considers how to answer. "The Kozlov family runs the Russian syndicate on the East Coast, and we've been in a territorial dispute for the past 6 months over shipping routes and distribution networks. They want me dead, because removing me would destabilize my organization and allow them to move into markets we currently control, and yes, they would absolutely torture you for any scrap of information they could extract, because in our world knowledge is power, and weakness is death," he begins, his voice matter-of-fact, as he discusses violence and murder like other people discuss business strategies and market competition. "As for what I do, I run one of the largest criminal organizations in the country, controlling everything from legitimate business interests to less legal enterprises. And before you ask, yes, that includes activities that would horrify your moral sensibilities, but it also includes protecting thousands of people who work for me and their families, maintaining order in communities where law enforcement has failed, and operating by a code that has more honor than you might expect from someone you've labeled a monster." The honesty is brutal and refreshing simultaneously, stripping away any illusion that Dante is anything other than what he appears to be, and I find myself oddly grateful that he's not trying to soften or justify or make himself more palatable to my civilian sensibilities. "As for how long you'll be here, I genuinely don't know, because these situations can resolve themselves quickly if the right pressure is applied in the right places, or they can drag on for months if both sides decide to dig in and make it a war of attrition," he continues, and I can see the calculation in his eyes, the strategic thinking of someone who's spent his life navigating dangerous waters and learning to anticipate threats before they materialize. "And as for leaving, I can't stop you from walking out that door if you're determined to do so, but I can tell you that doing so would almost certainly result in your death within 48 hours, because the Kozlov family has eyes everywhere, and they're already looking for the nurse who treated me, and the only reason you're still alive is because they haven't yet connected you to me, or figured out where you've disappeared to. But that protection only extends as far as these walls and the security I can provide. The weight of that statement settles over me like a shroud, the understanding that my prison is also my sanctuary, that the man who kidnapped me is also the only thing standing between me and a terrible death at the hands of people I never knew existed until yesterday. So I'm supposed to just accept this, just surrender my entire life and trust that you'll keep me safe and eventually let me go, even though you're admittedly a criminal who does things that would horrify my moral sensibilities? I ask, hearing the bitterness and fear in my own voice but unable to suppress it. Dante shifts in the bed, wincing slightly as the movement pulls at his injury. And when he speaks again, there's something raw and almost vulnerable in his expression, a glimpse beneath the armor of the dangerous crime lord to the man underneath. I'm asking you to survive, Catalina, to make the smart choice even though it's not the choice you want, to trust that despite everything I am and everything I've done, I have no interest in harming you, and every interest in keeping you safe until this storm passes, and you can return to your simple life of saving people who deserve it more than I do, he says. And there's something in his voice that makes my breath catch, something that sounds almost like longing for a different life or a different world where circumstances might have been different. And in the meantime, I'm offering you the freedom of this house and grounds, access to anything you want or need, and the opportunity to see how the other half lives, to understand that the world is more complicated and morally ambiguous than the clean black and white of your hospital corridors, where people are either patients who need saving or problems that need solving. Before I can formulate a response, before I can begin to process the complex tangle of emotions his words have stirred up, there's a sharp knock on the door, and Renzo enters without waiting for permission, his scarred face grim with news that clearly can't wait for social niceties. "Boss, we have a problem," he says, his eyes flicking to me briefly before returning to Dante. "The Kozlovs just hit one of our warehouses on the waterfront, killed 3 of our men and made off with a shipment worth $500,000, and they left a message saying this is just the beginning, that they're going to dismantle everything you've built piece by piece until you're dead or broken." The temperature in the room seems to drop as Dante's expression hardens into something cold and deadly, all traces of vulnerability vanishing as he transforms back into the crime lord who commands fear and respect in equal measure. And I realize with crystalline clarity that I haven't just been pulled into Dante Valorian's world, I've been pulled into the middle of a war that's about to escalate into something far more dangerous than I ever imagined, and the man who promised to protect me is about to prove whether that promise is worth anything when his entire empire is under siege. The days that follow Renzo's announcement blur together into a strange existence where luxury and danger intertwine so completely that I can no longer distinguish where one ends and the other begins. And I find myself falling into a rhythm that feels simultaneously foreign and oddly natural. Mornings spent reviewing Dante's wound care with Dr. Castellano, who's begun to treat me as a colleague rather than a hostage. Afternoons wandering the extensive library that houses more books than I could read in a lifetime. And evenings that have somehow evolved into long conversations with Dante as he recovers. Discussions that range from philosophy to medicine, to the complicated moral landscape he navigates with a combination of ruthlessness and unexpected principle. He's nothing like what I expected a mafia boss to be. This man who quotes Dante Alighieri with the same ease he discusses strategy for dealing with the Kozlov threat, who shows genuine interest in my opinions on everything from healthcare policy to the novels I'm reading from his collection, who looks at me with an intensity that makes my skin flush and my heart race in ways that have nothing to do with fear and everything to do with an attraction I absolutely should not be feeling toward my captor. The estate has become less of a prison and more of a strange sanctuary, where the outside world with all its violence and uncertainty can't touch me, where I exist in a bubble of marble floors and meaningful conversations and stolen glances that linger too long to be innocent. And I'm terrified by how quickly I'm adapting to this gilded cage, how easily I've slipped into a life that should feel wrong but instead feels dangerously right. I tell myself that what I'm feeling is just Stockholm Syndrome, just my mind's desperate attempt to find safety and connection with the person who holds power over my situation. But that explanation feels too simple and too clinical to account for the way my pulse quickens when Dante smiles at something I've said, or the way our conversations stretch late into the night as we discover unexpected common ground between a trauma nurse from Pittsburgh and a crime lord who runs an empire built on violence and loyalty. He's shown me pieces of himself that I suspect few people ever see. The boy who lost his father to a rival family's ambition and had to become a man and a leader at 17. The brother who put his younger sister through medical school so she could have a legitimate life, far away from the darkness that claimed him. The man who operates by a code of honor that's brutal but unwavering, and who genuinely believes he's providing order and protection in a world where the legal system has failed the people who need it most. I find myself arguing with him about morality and choice and whether the ends can ever truly justify the means, heated debates where he listens to my perspective with genuine consideration, even when he disagrees, where he challenges my black and white thinking about good and evil, and forces me to acknowledge the shades of gray that exist in the messy reality of human existence. And these conversations leave me exhilarated and confused, and dangerously drawn to a man I should be running from if I had any sense of self-preservation. The breaking point comes on the 8th night of my captivity, when I'm reading in the library at nearly midnight, because sleep has become elusive and my mind won't quiet. And Dante appears in the doorway looking like sin incarnated in expensive pajama pants, and nothing else. His healing wound visible as a stark reminder of the violence that defines his world, but doing nothing to diminish the raw masculine beauty of him. "Can't sleep either?" he asks, moving into the room with the predatory grace that never quite leaves him, even when he's recovering from a gunshot wound. And I'm suddenly very aware that we're alone in a house where his staff has retired for the night, and there's nothing between us but air and intention, and the electric tension that's been building since the moment I walked into the wrong hospital room. I should make an excuse and leave, should maintain the careful distance I've been trying to preserve between us. But instead I find myself inviting him to sit, to share the wine I've been drinking, to talk about anything except the increasingly complicated feelings that are making it hard to breathe when he's near. He settles into the chair across from me, and we fall into conversation about the book I'm reading, a discussion of tragedy and fate, and whether people can ever truly escape the circumstances of their birth, and somewhere in the middle of debating Greek philosophy, his hand finds mine across the small table between us, and neither of us pulls away. "You fascinate me, Catalina Moretti," he says, his voice dropping to something rough and intimate that makes every nerve ending in my body come alive with awareness. "You walked into my life by accident, saw me at my most vulnerable, and instead of running or calling for help, you chose to save me. And in the days since you've been here, you haven't once begged or pleaded or tried to manipulate me for your freedom. You've just been yourself, honest and fierce and so fucking brave that it takes my breath away." His thumb traces circles on my palm, and I know I should pull my hand back, should remind us both that I'm here against my will, and that whatever this is between us is built on a foundation of coercion and necessity. But the words won't come, because some part of me that I'm terrified to examine too closely doesn't want to pull away, wants instead to lean into this dangerous attraction and see where it leads. "I shouldn't feel this way about you," I hear myself saying, my voice barely above a whisper as I voice the truth I've been trying to deny for days. "You kidnapped me, destroyed my normal life, pulled me into a world of violence and danger, and I should hate you for it, should be counting the days until I can escape back to my simple existence. But instead, I find myself looking forward to our conversations, to the way you challenge everything I think I know about morality and choice, to the moments when you look at me like I'm something precious instead of just a complication you need to manage." Dante stands and pulls me up with him, and suddenly we're standing so close I can feel the heat radiating from his skin, can see the way his pupils have dilated until his eyes are more black than gray, can sense the barely restrained hunger in the tension of his body as he struggles with whatever internal battle is raging behind that carefully controlled exterior. I told myself I would keep you safe and let you go when this was over, that I wouldn't let this attraction become something more. But Catalina, you've gotten under my skin in a way no one ever has before, and I don't know how to maintain distance from someone who sees me. Really sees me. Not the monster or the boss or the criminal, but the man underneath all of that. And doesn't look away in disgust or fear. His hand comes, up to cut my face with a gentleness that seems impossible from someone capable of such violence. His thumb brushing across my cheekbone with reverence that makes my knees weak. And when he speaks again, his voice is raw, with an honesty that strips away all his armor. Tell me to leave. Tell me this is wrong and that you don't want this, and I'll walk away right now and maintain whatever professional distance we can salvage. But if you don't say those words, if you feel even a fraction of what I'm feeling, then I'm going to kiss you, and damn the consequences, because I've spent 8 days trying to resist this pull between us, and I don't think I can last another minute. I should say the words, should push him away and rebuild the walls between captor and captive, should remember that this started with coercion even if it's evolved into something more complex. But instead I find myself rising on my toes and closing the distance between us, answering his question with action rather than words as I press my lips to his in a kiss that detonates like a bomb between us. He responds with a hunger that's been building since the night I saved his life. His arms wrapping around me and pulling me flush against his body as he kisses me with the kind of consuming intensity that makes the world disappear until there's nothing but this moment, this connection, this dangerous and inevitable collision of two people who should never have met but who can't seem to stay apart. When we finally break apart, both breathing hard and trembling with the force of emotions too big to contain, Dante rests his forehead against mine and whispers words that change everything between us. You were supposed to be temporary? A complication to be managed until the threat passed? But Catalina? Somewhere in these past 8 days, you've become something infinitely more precious and infinitely more dangerous to me than any enemy with a gun. And I don't know what to do with these feelings except acknowledge them and hope that I haven't completely destroyed any chance of you feeling the same. Before I can respond, before I can begin to articulate the complex tangle of emotions rioting through me, the peaceful bubble of our moment shatters as alarms begin blaring throughout the estate, and Renzo's voice comes through the intercom system with barely controlled urgency, announcing that the Kozlovs have somehow breached the outer perimeter and are moving toward the main house with enough firepower to start a small war. And I watch as Dante transforms in an instant from the vulnerable man who just kissed me like I'm oxygen itself into the deadly crime lord who survived this long by being faster and more ruthless than his enemies. And I realize with heart-stopping clarity that the time for complicated feelings and moral debates is over, because the war that's been simmering in the background has just arrived at our doorstep. And I'm about to discover whether Dante's promise to protect me means anything when hell itself comes calling. The attack unfolds with the brutal efficiency of professionals who've planned this assault down to the last detail, and I find myself being hustled through hidden passages by Maria, whose calm demeanor never wavers, even as gunfire erupts somewhere in the house. Her instructions crisp and clear as she guides me to a reinforced panic room that's equipped with enough supplies to survive a siege and communication equipment that would make a military base jealous. But as she's about to seal me inside to wait out the violence, something fierce and reckless rises up in me, a refusal to be the helpless damsel who hides while the man I've fallen for. And I can admit that now, in the clarity that comes when death is a real possibility, fights for his life and mine. And I make a decision that would probably horrify my rational nurse brain if it weren't currently overridden by adrenaline and something that feels dangerously like love. I notice one of the security monitors showing Dante coordinating his men's defense from a position that's far too exposed for someone still recovering from a gunshot wound. And I see the moment when 3 Kozlov soldiers breach through a side entrance that should have been secure, moving toward his location with weapons raised and murder in their movements. And I know with bone-deep certainty that if I don't do something, he's going to die because he's too focused on protecting everyone else to notice the threat coming from his blind side. What happens next unfolds in a blur of instinct and desperation that I'll spend the rest of my life trying to fully comprehend. Because I grab the emergency radio from the panic room and use the codes I've memorized from listening to Dante's conversations to warn him about the incoming threat. My voice cutting through the chaos with information about positions and numbers that allows his men to intercept the attack before it reaches him. But the Kozlovs adapt faster than anyone anticipated, and suddenly I'm watching on the monitors as they change tactics and move toward the medical wing, where they must think Dante will be vulnerable. And I realize that my medical knowledge of the estate's layout has become a strategic asset, because I know that wing better than anyone except Dr. Castellano. Know the choke points and the weaknesses and the places where a small force could hold off a larger one if they're smart about it. I'm coordinating defensive positions through the radio before I fully realize what I'm doing, channeling every lesson Dante taught me during our long conversations about strategy and chess, and the importance of thinking 3 moves ahead. And I hear Renzo's voice crackling through the speakers with something that sounds like respect, as he acknowledges my intel and repositions his men based on my suggestions. And somewhere in the controlled chaos of violence and tactical decisions, I stop being a hostage and become something else entirely. A partner, a strategist, someone who's choosing to fight rather than hide. The battle reaches its crescendo when the Kozlov family's second-in-command, a man named Alexei, who Dante had warned me about during one of our conversations, manages to corner Dante in the library where we'd kissed just hours earlier. And I watch on the monitors as these 2 men who've been circling each other for months finally come face to face with nothing but hatred and history between them. I can't hear what they're saying, but I can see the confrontation building toward inevitable violence. Can see Dante favoring his injured side in a way that Alexei immediately notices and exploits. And I'm moving before conscious thought catches up to action, grabbing a fire extinguisher from the hallway and racing toward the library with my heart in my throat, and no plan beyond the desperate need to even the odds because I cannot, will not, lose this man who's somehow become essential to my existence in the span of 8 impossible days. I burst through the library doors as Alexei raises his weapon toward Dante's head, and I discharge the fire extinguisher directly into the Russian's face with enough force to temporarily blind him and create the opening Dante needs to disarm and neutralize the threat with the kind of brutal efficiency that should terrify me, but instead fills me with fierce pride, because this dangerous, complicated man is alive and whole, and looking at me like I've just performed a miracle. The aftermath of the attack stretches into dawn, as Dante's people secure the estate and deal with the remaining Kozlov soldiers, who have the sense to surrender once their leadership is captured. And I find myself sitting in Dante's office as he makes the kinds of calls that end wars and reshape power structures, his hand never leaving mine as he negotiates terms and establishes new boundaries, and demonstrates exactly why he survived as long as he has, in a world that devours the weak and the careless. When the last call is finished, and we're finally alone in the quiet that follows violence, he pulls me into his arms with a desperation that matches my own, and we hold each other like survivors of a shipwreck, clinging to the only solid thing in a churning sea. "You saved my life again," he says into my hair, his voice rough with emotions too big for words. "You could have stayed safe in the panic room like Maria instructed, could have hidden and waited for it all to be over. But instead you fought for me, coordinated my defenses, and put yourself at risk to even the odds when I needed it most. And Catalina, I need you to understand that what I feel for you goes so far beyond gratitude or attraction that I don't have adequate words to describe it." His hands frame my face with a tenderness that contradicts everything he is. And when he kisses me this time, it tastes like promise and permanence, and the kind of love that transforms everything it touches. The choice he offers me 3 days later, after the dust has settled and the Kozlov family has been neutralized through a combination of strategic arrests, orchestrated by Dante's contacts in law enforcement, and internal power struggles that leave them too weakened to pose a continued threat, is the same choice he gave me that first night, but with completely different implications. "You're free to go, Catalina," he says, as we stand in the same library where everything changed, where I kissed him and then saved him, and somewhere in between became someone I barely recognize. I've ensured your safety, eliminated the threat, and arranged for you to return to your life with enough compensation to make up for the disruption I caused, and no one will ever connect you to me or to any of this if you choose to walk away. But there's a question in his storm-gray eyes, a vulnerability that the most dangerous man on the East Coast is allowing me to see. And I realize he's offering me freedom, while simultaneously hoping I'll choose captivity. Hoping I'll see that what we've built in these impossible weeks is worth more than the simple life I left behind. I think about my apartment and my job and the version of Catalina Moretti who existed before I walked into the wrong hospital room, and I realize that woman feels like a stranger now. Someone I've outgrown or evolved past or simply left behind in the process of becoming someone who can stand beside a king of shadows and not flinch from the darkness. I'm not going back, I say, watching his expression shift from guarded hope to something that looks like wonder and relief and bone-deep joy all tangled together. Because somewhere between you kidnapping me and me saving your life twice and us fighting off an army together, I fell in love with the most impossible man in the world, and I'd rather be your queen in the shadows than live safely in the light without you. He kisses me with the kind of reverence usually reserved for sacred things, and when he slides a blood-red ruby ring onto my finger, a family heirloom he tells me later, one that marks me as his in ways that transcend legal marriage, I know I'm making a choice that will define the rest of my life. The nurse who stumbled into the wrong room has become the woman who chose her own fate, who looked at a gilded cage and decided it was actually a kingdom, who found love in the last place she should have looked and discovered that sometimes the most dangerous choice is also the most honest one. As I stand wrapped in Dante's arms, watching the sun set over grounds that have become my home and a world that has become my reality, I understand that some wrong turns lead us exactly where we're meant to be, even if the destination is nothing like what we imagined, and I wouldn't change a single moment of the chaos and terror and unexpected beauty that brought me here, to this man, to this life, to this perfect, dangerous, inevitable love that transformed everything I thought I knew about myself and showed me that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the simplest mistake, walking into the wrong room at exactly the right time